My name is Evan, and I was 26 when this happened. It was December of 2019, just a few days before Christmas. In a small town called Maple Ridge, I lived alone in a narrow 2-story house that used to belong to my aunt. She moved overseas years earlier, and I rented the place from her cheap. It creaked a lot, especially in winter, but I'd gotten used to it. I worked in tech support for a mid-sized company, and at the time, my manager, Derek, was really relaxed about remote work. As long as deadlines were met, no one cared when you worked. I had saved up enough work-from-home days to stay home the entire week before Christmas. A huge winter storm was coming, and honestly, I didn't want to be anywhere near the roads. That day, I rolled out of bed late, close to noon. Outside, the sky already looked heavy and gray, like it was being pressed down by something. I made coffee, sat at my desk upstairs, and logged in. The house was quiet except for the heater clicking on and off, and the wind slowly starting to howl outside. By mid-afternoon, the snow came down hard. Thick flakes slapped against the windows, and the wind rattled the siding like someone shaking the house. By around 4 o'clock, it was already dark. Not the normal kind of dark either. It was that storm dark, where the sky looks bruised and raw. I thought about driving out to grab food, but one look at the road outside changed my mind. Snow was piling up fast, and the wind made it hard to see even the houses across the street. I stayed in, figuring I'd eat whatever I could find later. I kept working as the storm got louder. I left the blinds open because watching the snowfall helped me focus. That's when I noticed it. A thin line of light moved across the snow outside my window. At first, I thought it was a reflection from inside, but then it moved again, slow and steady, sweeping back and forth. It was a flashlight. I leaned back in my chair and watched it. The beam disappeared behind the side of my house, then came back. My stomach tightened. It was freezing out there, and the snow was coming down sideways. No one should have been outside. I stood up and walked closer to the window, pressing my face near the glass. I tried to look down along the side of the house, but the snow was thick, and the darkness swallowed everything. The light flickered once more, then vanished completely. I waited, staring into the storm, but it never came back. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a neighbor looking for something they dropped. Maybe someone's dog got loose. Still, my chest felt tight as I went back to my desk. The next couple of hours were tense in a quiet way. The house groaned as the wind pushed against it. Every now and then, I thought I heard something heavier than the usual creaks. A dull bump, a scrape. Each time I paused and listened, but nothing followed. Then I heard a loud thud. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't wind. It sounded like something hitting hard, like wood cracking or a door slamming inside the house. I stood up so fast, my chair rolled backward. My heart was pounding. I stepped into the hallway and listened. Nothing. Just the wind screaming outside. I went downstairs, moving slowly, checking each room as I passed. Everything looked normal. Doors were closed, windows locked. No signs of anything broken. I felt stupid for being nervous. I started heading back upstairs. I was halfway up when I heard a sharp click and the entire house went black. No lights, no heater, nothing. The power was out. The darkness was complete. With the storm outside, there wasn't even moonlight coming through the windows. I waved my hand in front of my face and saw nothing. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I told myself the storm knocked the power out. That made sense. Still, my hands were shaking as I turned and carefully felt my way back down the stairs. The breaker box was in the basement, behind a thin wooden door at the end of the hallway. I kept one hand on the wall, inching forward. That's when I heard it. Movement, soft, slow, and close. It came from behind the basement door. I froze. The sound wasn't random. It wasn't pipes or wood settling. It sounded like someone shifting their weight. Then, very slowly, the basement door creaked open. I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I slipped into the bathroom beside me and stayed perfectly still. I didn't close the door. I was too scared the sound would give me away. Footsteps moved into the hallway. They were slow, careful, confident. Each step made my skin crawl. The person walked closer, close enough that I could smell something damp and cold, like wet clothes and snow. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom. I thought I was going to pass out. Then they moved again. The footsteps passed right by the open doorway. Whoever it was walked just a few feet from me. I couldn't see them at all. The darkness swallowed everything. I only knew they were there because of the sound. They reached the stairs and started going up. Once they hit the carpet, the sound disappeared. The storm roared outside, louder than ever. I waited, counting my breaths. I didn't know where the person was, but I knew I couldn't stay. I ran. I stumbled through the dark, slamming into walls, barely keeping my balance. I reached the garage, grabbed my keys, and burst out the side door. Snow blasted my face as I jumped into my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the keys. All right, imagine I'm telling you this late at night, maybe while we're sitting around with the lights low and the wind rattling the windows. This is one of those stories that still messes with me when I think about it too long. This happened back in 2016, and I still remember it way too clearly. My name's Evan, and at the time I was making a winter drive from Duluth, Minnesota, out to a small town in northern Idaho to visit my older cousin Mark. He lived way out there, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor is miles away, and cell service comes and goes whenever it feels like it. I'd done long drives before, so I didn't think much of it. I left early in the morning with my beat-up Honda, a thermos of weak coffee, and a playlist I'd already heard 100 times. The first part of the drive was boring but fine. Gray skies, empty highways, nothing but trees and frozen fields. But once I got farther north, things started to change. Snow began falling, light at first. Just a few flakes drifting past the windshield. I remember thinking it looked peaceful. That didn't last. As the day dragged on and the sun started sinking, the snow came down harder, way harder. The road slowly disappeared under thick white layers, and the world outside my headlights turned into this swirling mess of wind and ice. It felt like driving through fog made of snow. I couldn't tell where the shoulder ended and the ditch began. Every mile made my chest feel tighter. I finally told myself out loud, okay, that's enough. I decided I'd stop at the next place I saw. I didn't care what it was. Gas station, diner, someone's shed with a light on, anything. About 10 or 15 minutes later, I saw a glow off to the side of the highway. Just a dim yellow light barely visible through the snow. I slowed down and turned in without even reading the sign. The parking lot was tiny and already filling up with snow. There were 3 cars parked there. One was almost buried, like it had been sitting for hours. The other 2 looked newer to the snow, same as mine. The building itself looked old, really old, like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. A low roof, dark windows, and a flickering sign that said, Mabel's Stop, with half the letters barely glowing. I pulled my jacket tight and ran through the storm to the door. The wind screamed around me, and snow hit my face like needles. When I stepped inside, the warmth hit me right away, but the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. The place was small, maybe 4 tables total. A short counter near the front. It smelled like burnt coffee and old wood. Behind the counter was a woman with tired eyes and gray hair pulled into a loose bun. Sitting at the counter were 2 men. What struck me first was the silence. No talking, no radio, no clinking cups. Just this heavy, awkward quiet. When the door closed behind me, all three of them turned their heads at the exact same time and looked straight at me. Then they smiled and said hello, like nothing was wrong. I told myself I was just on edge from the drive. I ordered coffee and sat near the window. The storm outside was getting worse, and I watched my car slowly disappear under fresh snow. That's when I really noticed one of the men at the counter. He was older, probably in his 50s or early 60s. His skin looked gray, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken and glassy, and he barely blinked. He looked wrong, like someone wearing a person instead of actually being one. After I sat down, the cafe went quiet again. No one spoke. You could hear the heater clicking and the wind outside howling against the walls. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. After a few minutes, one of the men stood up. He said real casually that he needed to try to make it to his cabin before the roads closed. Nobody replied. He walked out into the storm. A minute later, the other man stood up and left too. Didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. That didn't sit right with me at all. I walked back to the counter and asked the woman if those guys were together. She shrugged and said they'd shown up around the same time and had been arguing outside before coming in. She said it like it was no big deal, but her hands were shaking slightly as she wiped the counter. I stayed inside for about half an hour. No one else came in. The storm just kept screaming outside. When I went back to the window, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Both of their cars were still there, but the men were gone. I stepped outside to look around. The cold hit me so hard it felt like it punched the air out of my lungs. Snow crunched under my boots, and the wind carried this low whistling sound through the trees behind the cafe. There were no footprints near the cars, no signs of anyone. I rushed to my car and tried to start it. Nothing. No clicking. No engine turning over. Dead silent. That's when panic really set in. And then I saw movement near the tree line. A shape stepping out of the woods behind the cafe. It was one of the men, the older one. He was walking slowly toward the parking lot, like he wasn't in any hurry at all. I ran back inside and locked the door. I told the woman to call the police. She did. When the man reached the door, he tried to open it. When it didn't budge, he looked right at me through the glass. His eyes were red. His face looked even paler than before. He banged on the door once, hard, then he smiled, and ran. When the police finally arrived, they followed tracks into the woods and found the other man's body. His car, like mine, had the ignition line cut. Someone had planned this. I made it out alive, but Let me tell you this the way I usually tell it to friends late at night, when the room is quiet and nobody's laughing anymore. This happened in 2018, right before New Year's, during one of those long winter breaks where you're happy to be home, but also counting the days until you can leave again. My name's Jake, and I was staying in my hometown, a little place called Pine Hollow. It's one of those towns surrounded by trees on all sides, where the woods feel like they start right at the edge of your backyard. I was home from school and completely broke. So to make some extra cash, I was driving for a food delivery app. Nothing fancy, just picking up food and dropping it off to people who didn't feel like leaving the house. That night, it was snowing. Not a full-on blizzard, but enough to make everything quiet and soft, like the whole town was holding its breath. The roads were still drivable, but nobody wanted to go out. Those nights were usually great for tips, so I stayed out late. Most of the deliveries were normal. Warm houses, porch lights, people yelling thanks through the door. Around 10 at night, things slowed down, but then I got one more order. The app said it was going to Redwood Road, way outside town. What made me pause was the name on the order. It was Evan. Evan wasn't a stranger. He was a guy I vaguely knew from high school. Not a friend, exactly, but we talked a few times. Sat near each other in class. He was quiet. Always gave off a weird vibe, but nothing specific enough to point at. Just off. I almost canceled right then, but I told myself I was overthinking it. The drive took about 20 minutes. The farther I went, the worse my signal got. Streetlights disappeared. Houses thinned out. Trees crowded in closer and closer until it felt like the road was being swallowed. Eventually, my GPS told me to turn onto a narrow dirt road that cut straight into the woods. I followed it until it stopped making sense. At the end of the road was what looked like the start of a driveway, but it was completely buried in snow. No tire tracks, no footprints, no lights. Just a dark opening between tall trees. I sat there with my engine running, staring into the woods. It didn't feel like a place where someone lived. It felt abandoned, so I called Evan. He picked up immediately. His voice sounded rough, like he'd been smoking all day. He talked slow, like he wasn't in a hurry at all. I told him where I was and said I didn't see a house. He laughed quietly and said, "Yeah, the snow covers it. You're in the right spot." I told him I wasn't driving my car through that. He got annoyed fast. Said something like, "That's why I ordered delivery, man. You're already there." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Like he was enjoying the situation. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the food, locked my car, and started walking. The snow crunched loudly under my boots. The driveway wasn't clear at all. I couldn't even tell where it was supposed to be. The trees closed in around me, tall and black against the sky. No moon, no stars. Just thick clouds and falling snow. I kept looking back at my car. The red taillights were the only thing keeping me grounded. With every step, they got dimmer. Then I heard it. A crunch. Not mine. Off to my left, it sounded like someone else stepping on snow. Slow, careful. I froze and shined my phone light into the trees. The beam barely cut through the darkness. It felt like the woods were swallowing the light. I didn't see anything, but the silence afterward felt heavy, like I was being watched. I told myself it was an animal and kept going. After a few more steps, the cold really started to bite. My hands were numb, my ears burned, and I still hadn't seen a house. No windows, no porch, nothing. That's when it hit me. What if there wasn't a house? I stopped walking. The snow kept falling around me, whispering as it landed. I turned in a slow circle, and for the first time, I realized how deep I was in the woods. I pulled out my phone and called Evan again. I decided right then that if he didn't answer, or if he told me to keep walking, I was done. The phone rang, once, twice, and then I saw a light. It was far ahead, between the trees. A small yellow glow, like someone flicking on a flashlight. Before I could say anything, the light snapped off. At the exact same moment, the call disconnected. I didn't think. I ran. I ran back the way I came, slipping and stumbling through the snow. My heart was pounding so loud, I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't know if someone was behind me, and that was the worst part, not knowing. When I finally reached my car, my stomach dropped. One side of it was tilted. I got closer and saw the tire, completely flat, slashed clean through. I don't remember getting in. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember driving, fast, on a ruined tire. I didn't care. I called the police, but they didn't do much. Asked questions, took notes. That was it. I never heard from Evan again. To this day, I'm sure he was trying to get me deeper into those woods. I don't know why. I don't know what would have happened if I kept walking. But sometimes, when it's snowing and everything goes quiet, I think about that light turning off in the trees. And I'm really glad I ran.